Yeah. Hi everybody, I'm Luke Hector from the Broken Meeple, Beyond the Base Game. If this is your first time checking out the channel, then consider thumbing it up, commenting, subscribing, maybe look at the Patreon, and of course, checking out my new sponsor. As a fellow gamer, you'll understand this is unacceptable. The solution? Head down to my new sponsor, Kiender.co.uk. Kiender stocks many of the hot new releases as well as some old hidden gems. Free delivery on orders over £30, further discounts on bulk purchases, and even 5% of your spending refunded back to you as points to be used for further discounts down the line. If you use the referral link in the description below and sign up for a new account, you'll get 5% discount on your first order over £60. So let's make gaps in your collection a thing of the past. Get down to Kiender and start saving today. Thank you for listening and enjoy the rest of the video.
Get on with it.
So for today we are looking at the Ginkopolis, I hate that name, Ginkopolis, expansion, The Experts. This was donated to me by Asmodee, so thank you for them for helping out with a review copy. And this is an expansion for a very underrated game. Do I think the game is like the best game ever? No, but I've been playing it a little bit more often and it hasn't appeared in my top 100 yet, although it could potentially next time. We'll have to see. It is starting to rise up in my appreciation for it. But Ginkopolis is one of those games from Pro Games that's not talked about much, but those who do talk about it really like it. And it is a pretty cool game, but you don't hear about it much. It came out in 2013 odd time, maybe even slightly earlier than that, and it went out of print, and then nobody spoke about it for ages. Until recently, it's had a reprint along with the expansion, and now of course people are starting to think, oh, maybe I should check it out anymore. I've not actually reviewed Ginkopolis on the channel, maybe I should do that at some point, maybe on the podcast, but I want to talk about the expansion because after playing this game a few times, I'm like, okay, cool. What could the expansion add? Is there a way that they could augment the game to make it even better? Well, yeah. We'll get onto the overall verdict later. But basically what this expansion does is it adds 6 new modules. And you can basically decide which of the modules that you want to throw in the game. Although 6 modules is a little bit of a lie. It's mainly 5. 5.5, maybe 5.25 modules. We'll get onto that a bit later. But essentially, you just choose which modules you like. They've got different levels of complexity, and you can decide which ones you want to throw in. If you're not familiar with Ginkopolis, it's essentially a city building game where you are building tiles of red, blue, and yellow in differing heights. Some tiles start in play, and they're surrounded by letter markers that show where new tiles can be placed. On your turn, you choose a card from your hand simultaneously, players reveal the cards and add new tiles to the border of the city in the appropriate location, or place tiles on top of existing tiles. Each card that you don't play from your hand, though, is passed on to your left-hand neighbour, so you have to keep in mind how your play will set up theirs. And when you add new tiles to the city, you take another card of the same colour, and these cards, as they get more powerful as the game progresses, provide you with additional abilities and potential point-scoring effects. It's a quirky little game, and like I say, definitely underrated. It's definitely worth checking out, but maybe I'll have to do a proper review on it sometime so I can give it a bit more detail. So how do these different modules work then? I'm just going to go through each one in turn and say what my general thoughts are before I get to a verdict on the whole expansion itself. First up, you've got new buildings. Yes, I said it goes from 1 to 20. Well, now you've got buildings in each colour that go 21, 22 and 23. Yay! I mean, that's pretty much all it is. You know, normally you can choose to take a couple of level 1 buildings at some stage. Now you have a choice of taking a single one of these. They're higher in value, they allow you to build on top of them, and the cards associated with them get you points at the end of the game for collecting other types of point scoring cards. They're fine, but I don't think they really add that much to the game, and honestly, the idea of collecting other types of point scoring cards to score points for this particular set is kind of weird. It's an unusual type of scoring mechanic. However, it's a pretty easy include to throw in the game. It doesn't add too much in the way of complexity, but it also doesn't add that much interesting stuff to the game either. It's just kind of there.
Well, I like war, but I wouldn't say I love it.
Next up, you've got, very simply, prestige buildings. So I already mentioned 21, 22 and 23. Well, you can also go as high as 24 and 25 if you throw in these prestige buildings. Now, they don't have an associated card with them, so there's no other point scoring opportunity. It's mainly just a way to secure yourself against them being taken over by other players. Again, relatively simple. It adds another option for drawing tiles, which can elongate the length of the game because there's a bit more to consider. But again, they're there. It's just like the other new buildings. I don't feel that they add that much to them. I would have maybe been more interested if you just given me like alternate versions of the other buildings with some similar but differing effects so that you could chop and change each game. These you kind of just bolt on and forget about it. And like I say, you can bolt this on with the other buildings and give yourself a little bit of extra choice, but for the price of the expansion, I don't see it being that worth it.
Well, that was pointless.
Now we get on to probably the most complex, but also the best expansion out of this entire expansion. That's the one way of putting it. The green spaces. It essentially allows you to create parks. These do not have buildings on them, or numbers, or anything like that. You can only play these with the urbanization action, which is essentially what you use to create more land. But what these do is they add a nice little strategic element to the area control aspect of the game. So when you play the urbanization card, when you place the green space first up, you get to utilize the buildings that are adjacent to it as if you had played them already. So knowing where to place these is already a cool thing. But on top of that, if you urbanize next to a park already, you get bonus victory points depending on how big the park is. Now, that's all well and good, you know, that's on its own, that's already pretty cool. But then when you get to the end game scoring part of the game, essentially when you're deciding like, oh, the resources are in this particular district or that for area control, resources that are in a park also count as being included in adjacent districts, providing that you've got one resource in both. So as long as I've got one in a park and one in the district that's relevant, I get to add the resources on the park to the district that I'm in already for the purposes of scoring majorities and at the end of the game. It's a cool addition, and it really does add another cool strategic element to the area control part. This is one that I would actually like to throw into most of my games. However, it does add to the complexity of the game. I mean, it's a simple inclusion in terms of the tiles. It's literally just these, and certainly you have a choice of whether to draw these or the normal tiles. So it's another different choice to make. But the complexity of using these takes the game out of newbie player friendliness. I mean, the game is not new player friendly anyway. It's not a gateway level game, but if I'm teaching this to players for the first time, the last thing I want to do is throw these in. So this is definitely one to play with, well, no pun intended, expert players, as the expansion suggests. But honestly, this is the best module in this expansion, and definitely worth looking into if you want to add a little bit more gameriness to Ginkopolis.
Dear God, what is it like in your funny little brains? It must be so boring.
Now we got to get on to what is probably the worst. It's hard to say whether this is the worst module in the set. It's the worst from a mechanical perspective. The event tiles, which is annoying because the event tiles is probably the biggest set of components you get in this expansion. I mean, all of these are the event tiles. But what essentially happens is that there's one for each of green, blue, red, and yellow, and at the start of the game, players get to look at all four, decide which two they like, and when they play a turn during the game, they can decide whether to play one of these event tiles with them, and each one does something different. Here's two big problems with this though. Firstly, the iconography on these event tiles is some of the most unintuitive stuff I've seen. It's confusing as all get out, which means you're going to need the rulebook in order to figure out what they each do. I guarantee you will not necessarily guess what any of these icons mean on these event tiles. But the other problem is that half of them are pretty vindictive effects. They actually involve things like stealing stuff from your opponents. This is a game that doesn't warrant that level of vindictiveness. I mean, you're already vying for area control in the game, okay? So the idea that somebody might take a district off you that you were building up is already a fairly vindictive part of Ginkgopolis, but then everybody's aware of that. It's area control, it's kind of in the game. But these event tiles just coming out and saying, right, I'm going to, steal something off you, it's like, I'm not a fan of these at all. It's an easy include if you want to throw them in, but having to remind myself all the time what the iconography does and throwing in like vindictive elements that I just think are against the spirit of the game, I don't like using these at all, and honestly after trying them I won't use them again. It's a shame because it's a big part of this expansion, but Yeah, I think there's better ways to do event tiles with these sort of games.
There'll be plenty of time to discuss your objections when and if you return.
Now, this next one is possibly the most insulting one of this set. It's an easy mechanic to throw in, and it's actually, in a way, a good mechanic to throw in. But it's a bit insulting, because it literally is this much of rules. That's it. Just that much of rules is keep a card.
What the hell is that?
And the keep a card is literally just a rule variant that could have been printed on a website and never included in something that you paid money for. The idea of it even counting as one of the 6 modules is ridiculous. I mean, that's why I said this thing basically has 5 1/4 modules in it. It is a cool inclusion though, I will say, but again, it elongates the time of the game, it adds to the complexity level, and it's definitely not recommended for teaching this with new players. Basically what happens is when you play one of your 4 cards in a turn, you play a card and that's the one you resolve, and then you normally pass the other 3 to the player on your left when you're all done. In this version, you instead get to choose one of those 3 cards to keep face down in front of you and only pass 2 cards on. So you think, well, I could really use this one, or I really don't want the neighbor to get that. Now, it's a cool addition, but not one that I tend to use all the time, because I think that decision of deciding, look, I know I want to play this card, but those other 3 are going to go to the opponent. It hurts, but I think I'm going to have to do it, is a cool tactical choice. Giving you the opportunity to basically just negate that is kind of, I don't know, it kind of goes against what I like from the whole passing the cards round. Not to mention that if you are new to this game, you will not have the faintest clue which card you really should be keeping behind. It can also add to the AP-ness of the game, because as well as having to decide which one you're going to play, you've then also got to decide which one you're going to keep. So it's another choice that can hold people up. It's an easy inclusion. If you want a bit more control over the game, you know, a little bit less, it loses some fluidity in the game system because you're keeping cards at different times. But if you want a little bit more control, a little bit more gameriness, then by all means you can throw it in. I'm kind of hit or miss on this one, but the fact that it's literally just a paragraph of writing and it's supposedly one of the 6 modules is a little bit insulting, I gotta say.
Dude, you're embarrassing me in front of the wizards.
And the final module is essentially what the expansion is called, Experts. It's a set of cards that you throw in. Oh wait, those are the building cards, we won't need those. It's basically player powers. So you get to choose so many of these at the start of the game, and they give you some other means of kind of augmenting the rules or breaking the rules for yourself. So again, it's basically just player powers. Now normally I love player powers, like, oh, I get to have player powers in this game, great. This is a little bit problematic though, for 2 reasons. Firstly, and some others will debate this, I'm not convinced these are all balanced. There are some in here that I feel are like, they score you points for what you have and what opponents have. They are a lot easier to deal with than some of these other ones that are very much more situational. Because some of these will just trigger, like, regardless of the fact, and some of them you'll only get benefits of if you go out and hunt down those benefits. So the balance is already a bit off key. But the other problem is that it adds just another level of complexity. And I think this kind of is one aspect of this expansion which is kind of rooted in the whole thing that is a problem I have with it. Ginkopolis is not the most complex game ever, but it does have some complexities to it. It's also not very intuitive. Even though there's not a huge amount of rules to learn in Ginkopolis, it's abstracted, it's different from other games, so it's a hard one to teach, and obviously it's harder for people to learn. To then throw in stuff like this just adds a level of complexity that I just don't think you need in Ginkopolis. It also dictates which event tiles that you use if you pick them. So if I pick this particular expert, I have to take 2 of the red event tiles, and if I pick this one I get a green and a yellow. But if you're not playing events, then it doesn't matter. But there's not that many different experts either. I mean, for a whole module of these things, it's kind of limited in scope, and I just don't feel I want to throw these in that much, even if I am playing this with people who know what they're doing. Certainly, I will never throw this in with new players, and again, that is another problem with this expansion, is that nothing in here really feels like something I would want to throw in if I was teaching this game to new players, which for me, and I understand that this is kind of more of a me thing, is something that I end up doing on a regular basis. I'm usually teaching this to new players, and that's kind of the way it goes.
I'm the doctor. Just accept it.
So yeah, not exactly the best of praises for this expansion, and it's just That's the way it is. It's just not a particularly good expansion that I can recommend. Honestly, the most useful thing in here, and this is actually kind of like almost slightly pathetic, is that it comes with a reference card for each player that tells you the powers on all the different cards. This was something that we asked for from the main game, and it basically goes through all the numbers from 4 to 23 or whatever, and summarizes for blue, yellow, and red what power is on those cards. Not something I want people to be studying constantly throughout the game, but it's a nice, useful aid for those who are new to it. This is the most useful thing out of this entire box, and it's just a reference aid.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
That's kind of sad, really. So, you've got an expansion here which takes a really cool, underrated game. I stress enough, Ginkopolis is a really cool game and you should check it out. But this expansion just felt very lackluster. Like, this is almost stuff that I think was on the cutting room floor when people were designing the original Ginkopolis, and so they thought, well, let's take all that stuff that we shoved on the cutting room floor and just basically shove it into this expansion box. When you hear people talk about Ginkopolis, you don't hear people talk about the expansion that much, and this is kind of why. The green spaces are cool. They're the best thing in it, but still, I wouldn't want to throw this in with new players. The experts themselves, they're not particularly varied, they're a bit too complex and not the most balanced either. The new buildings and the prestige buildings, yeah, they're easy inclusions, but they just don't really add that much to the game that's of interest, and it's just more complexity that you've got to teach as well as deal with in the setup and takedown, which is already pretty lengthy when you deal with the normal game. And then you've got these event tiles, which honestly I will never want to use because I don't want the added evilness that these things include in my games. And then you've got that keep a card one, which is a cool little variant, but again, adds to the complexity, adds to the length, and frankly could have literally just been a paragraph of text on a website. It doesn't count for this game. So honestly, yeah, this was a bit of a disappointment really. But to be honest, it's an expansion. You can take it or leave it, it's up to you. Maybe some of these modules took your fancy, maybe you really like some of these modules, in which case, you know, if you like the green spaces one, I can understand. But if you like some of these other modules, I'd be interested to know your thoughts, let me know in the comments. But yeah, this is not an expansion I recommend. It's pretty meh, pretty bad. I'm not going to give it plus points for giving you a reference card or having to keep a card rule. So you're talking 1 out of, what, 5 odd modules really? That's any good? Nah, this is pretty bad. I'm giving this one, overall, I'm giving this one a 3 out of 10. It's not like the most terrible thing I've ever played, but it is bad. I just think that for the money you pay for this, because it's not a cheap expansion, I mean, you're getting quality components. Yeah, you're getting those thick tiles again and good artwork and that, but yeah, I wouldn't buy this expansion just for the green spaces. No, you're going to need to buy this hoping you're going to use most of these modules. And honestly, I just don't think there's very many people out there who will. This is kind of a bit like the Isle of Skye Journeyman expansion. The other one that I really don't like. It adds too mumuch complexity and too much fiddliness to a game that didn't really need it in the first place. This is what this kind of feels like. Nowhere near as fiddly and complicated as that expansion was, but it's another example of an expansion that I just cannot recommend. I don't often end up doing a negative review for the Beyond the Base game, but yeah, this is probably one of my first. I don't recommend it. Stick with the base game. You'll be more than happy with it. Trust me, it's designed by Xavier Georges, so the same guy who did Carson City and the new one, I think Carnegie. Yeah, that everyone's, a lot of people are talking about. Same designer. By all means, underrated. Check it out. But this expansion, skip it. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then consider thumbing up the video, subscribing to the channel, consider looking at the Patreon to help me out, or you can just comment on the video and let me know your thoughts on Ginkgopolis and the expansion. Are you the complete opposite of me? Do you think this expansion's great? In which case, let me know and all the others know why in the comments. But if you agree with me on some of these thoughts, I'd like to know your experiences with this expansion as well. Or you can just tell me what you think of Ginkgopolis the base game. You know, have you just discovered it, or has it always been a favourite in your collection? Until next time, you can check out more content on the channel. I don't know which one specifically. You can check out this and this. Not that I can explain, I don't know what the timing of this video is going to be. Until next time, take care, remember as always, it's only a game. Bye for now.